The sky above Seoul turned dark as enormous alien ships blocked out the sun. These weren't just big, they were massive beyond anything humans had ever seen. Each ship was easily the size of a small city, their metal surfaces covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow with their own light. As they came down through the clouds, the air itself seemed to shake and tremble. People all over the world stopped what they were doing and looked up. Traffic came to a halt. Children pressed their faces against school windows. Office workers crowded onto rooftops. Everyone knew this was the moment that would change everything forever. The lead ship landed in the middle of what used to be a busy downtown area. The ground cracked under its weight, and all the nearby buildings shook like there was an earthquake. Steam rose from where the ship's hot metal touched the cold concrete. The smell of burned air filled the area. Then came the aliens themselves. Ambassador. Vexmar was not what anyone expected. He stood nearly 8 feet tall with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his face. His skin looked like it was made of dark metal, and strange patterns moved across it like living tattoos. He wore armor that seemed to be made from materials that didn't exist on Earth. It changed colors as he moved and made no sound despite looking incredibly heavy. Behind him came dozens of other aliens, all different species. Some looked like walking trees with too many arms. Others seemed to be made of living crystal that caught the light and threw rainbows everywhere. A few looked almost human, except their eyes were completely black and they never seemed to blink. The humans waiting for them looked so ordinary by comparison. They wore simple black suits and stood in neat rows. No fancy armor, no glowing weapons, no dramatic displays of power, just regular people with nervous expressions, holding tablets and briefcases like they were going to a business meeting. Minar stepped forward from the group. She was small compared to the ambassador, barely reaching his chest even though she was wearing heels. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore no jewelry except for a small watch on her wrist. Everything about her screamed, ordinary human being. "Welcome to Earth," she said in perfect English, though somehow everyone watching could understand her words in their own language. Her voice was calm and steady, but those paying close attention might have noticed she kept her hands clasped behind her back to hide how they trembled slightly. Vexmar looked down at her like someone might look at an interesting insect. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, first the top 2, then the bottom 2. When he spoke, his voice came out of a small device on his chest, translating his alien language into human words. "How quaint," he said, and there was definitely mockery in his tone. "Your species has learned to speak in organized sounds. Very impressive for such a young civilization." The other aliens behind him made sounds that might have been laughter, though it sounded more like machinery breaking down. One of them, who looked like a giant mantis made of silver, pointed at a nearby hot dog cart and said something in its own language that made the others laugh even harder. Minar's smile never wavered, though her jaw tightened just a bit. "We are honored by your visit, Ambassador. Earth has been looking forward to this moment for a very long time." "I'm sure you have," Vexmar replied, pulling out what looked like a scroll made of light. The holographic document unrolled in the key. Air between them, covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Let me explain why we're here, little human. Your species has finally developed the ability to leave your tiny planet. This is adequate progress." He gestured to the glowing scroll. "According to Galactic Law 847b, any species that achieves basic space travel may petition to join our coalition. However, such primitive civilizations require guidance. Lots of guidance." The way he said primitive made it clear what he really thought of humans. It was the same tone someone might use when talking about training a particularly slow pet. "Your planet has some useful resources," he continued, reading from the floating document. "Decent water supplies, acceptable mineral deposits, and a large population suitable for manual labor. Therefore, the Great Coalition has decided to extend an offer of junior membership to your species." The terms he laid out were presented like generous gifts, but they sounded more like surrender conditions. 60% of Earth's resources would go to support the Coalition's other worlds. Nearly half of all humans would be relocated to work in mines and factories on distant planets. Earth's governments would be dissolved and replaced by Coalition overseers who would make all important decisions. This is standard procedure, Vexmar explained, as if he was doing them a tremendous favor. All new members contribute to the greater good of the galaxy. In return, you receive our protection and guidance. Your species will finally have purpose beyond your meaningless little struggles on this backwater world. Minna listened to every word without interrupting. She nodded at appropriate moments and even took notes on her tablet as if she was genuinely considering this incredible opportunity. The other humans behind her stayed perfectly still and quiet, their faces giving away nothing. When Vexmar finished reading the terms, he rolled up the holographic scroll with a flourish. "This offer expires in 1 of your hours," he announced, "though I can't imagine why you would need so much time to accept such generosity." The alien delegation clearly expected immediate gratitude and acceptance. Several of them had already started making what sounded like victory speeches in their own languages. One pulled out some kind of device and began recording what was obviously meant to be a historic moment. The day another primitive species joined their great empire. But Minna simply clasped her hands in front of her and gave another small bow. "Thank you for explaining everything so clearly, Ambassador. This is indeed a significant decision for our species. Would it be possible to have a brief moment to discuss this with our leadership?" The request seemed to amuse Vexmar greatly. His 4 eyes blinked in that same sequence, and he made a sound that his translator turned into laughter. "Of course, little human. Take all the time you need to pretend you have other options." As Minna walked away with her small group of advisors, the aliens continued their quiet celebration. They had done this same routine on hundreds of worlds before. The outcome was always the same: acceptance, because the alternative was much worse for everyone involved. What none of them noticed was the tiny device Minna touched on her wrist as she walked away, or the brief message that appeared on her tablet. "All systems standing by, awaiting final authorization." The fate of Earth, and possibly the entire galaxy, now hung in the balance of whatever conversation was about to happen behind closed doors. The 20 minutes felt like an eternity to everyone watching. News crews from around the world had their cameras trained on the landing platform. People in their homes sat glued to their televisions, hardly daring to breathe. This was it, the moment that would decide whether humanity would remain free or become servants to an alien empire. When Minna finally walked back onto the platform, she looked exactly the same as before. Same calm expression, same steady walk, same simple black suit. Nothing about her suggested that she had just made the most important decision in human history. She approached Ambassador Vexmar with the same polite smile she had worn throughout their entire encounter. The alien delegation turned toward her with confident expressions. Several of them had already begun pulling out what looked like official documents, probably the paperwork to formalize Earth's surrender. One of the crystal-like aliens was adjusting some kind of recording device, clearly wanting to capture this historic moment of submission. Minna stopped a few feet away from the towering ambassador and clasped her hands in front of her. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the platform and into the microphones that would broadcast her words to the entire world. "Ambassador Vexmar, we have carefully considered your generous offer," she began, and for a moment it seemed like she might actually accept their terms. "After consulting with our leadership and weighing all the options available to us, Earth must respectfully decline your invitation to join the Galactic Coalition." The words hung in the air like a physical thing. For several long seconds nobody moved, nobody breathed. The only sound was the distant hum of the alien ships and the whisper of wind across the platform. Then the silence exploded into chaos. "Ambassador." Vexmar's 4 eyes went wide with shock. His mouth opened and closed several times without making any sound, like a fish pulled out of water. The other aliens began making noises that their translators couldn't handle, strange clicking sounds, electronic screeches, and what might have been cursing in languages that had no human equivalent. What?" Vexmar finally managed to say. "I'm sorry, I must have misheard you. Did you just say you're refusing our protection?" Minna nodded pleasantly. "That's correct. Our answer is no, thank you." She said it with the same tone someone might use to decline a second helping of dinner or turn down an invitation to a movie. Casual, polite, and completely final. The ambassador's confusion was almost comical to watch. His four eyes blinked in rapid sequence, and he looked around at his fellow aliens as if they might be able to explain what was happening. Several of them were frantically checking their own devices, probably trying to find some record of another species, making such an impossible choice. But that's not how this works, Vexmar stuttered. No species in the history of the galaxy has ever refused coalition membership. It's simply not done. Well, Minar replied with a small shrug, there's a first time for everything. The giant mantis-like alien pushed forward and began making aggressive gestures with its razor-sharp arms. Its translator crackled with static as it spoke. Foolish mammals, you do not understand what you are rejecting. We offer you purpose, meaning, a chance to serve something greater than your pathetic little world. Minar turned to look at the mantis creature with the same polite attention she might give to a child throwing a tantrum. We understand perfectly, and we appreciate your concern for our well-being. However, our decision remains unchanged. This was clearly not going the way Vexmar had expected. His confident demeanor began to crack, and something darker showed. Through underneath, when he spoke again, his voice had lost all pretense of politeness. Perhaps you misunderstand the nature of this offer, he said, and now there was real menace in his tone. This is not a negotiation, human. This is not a choice you get to make. You will accept our terms or you will face the consequences of your foolishness. The threat was clear enough that even the human camera crews took a step back. The air around the alien delegation seemed to shimmer with barely contained energy, and their ships overhead began to emit a low, threatening hum. But Minar didn't flinch. Instead, she turned and gestured to someone behind her. Would you like some tea while you consider our response? We have an excellent jasmine blend, and I think everyone could use a moment to calm down. The offer was so unexpected and so perfectly polite that it actually caught the aliens off guard. Here they were, making threats that had brought entire civilizations to their knees, and this human woman was offering them refreshments. A young man named Hyun Woo approached from the human delegation, carrying a tablet in one hand and maintaining the same professional calm as Minar. He looked like he could have been a college student or a junior office worker, certainly not someone you'd expect to see in the middle of first contact with an alien empire. As he got closer, Minar glanced at the screen of his tablet. The text was too small for anyone else to read, but those watching closely might have noticed her expression change slightly. Not fear or worry, but something that looked almost like satisfaction. The messages on the screen were brief but significant. Project Lazarus initialization complete. Deep storage, access confirmed. Dormant systems, awakening. Minar nodded slightly and leaned closer to Hyunwoo. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the tense silence, several people caught her words. How long has it been since our last field exercise? Hyunwoo consulted something on his tablet and whispered back, approximately 47 years, ma'am. Minar straightened up and looked back at the increasingly agitated alien delegation. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. Not the polite diplomatic smile she had been wearing, but something else entirely. Well then, she murmured, just loud enough for Hyunwoo to hear. I suppose we're due for another one. The young man nodded and began typing something on his tablet. Whatever message he was sending, it seemed to be important because he double-checked it before hitting send. Meanwhile, Ambassador Vexmar was working himself up into a rage that was truly impressive to watch. His four eyes had turned from their normal color to a bright, angry red, and the patterns on his metallic skin were shifting and swirling like a storm. You have exactly 60 seconds to reconsider your decision, he announced, his voice booming across the platform. After that, we will demonstrate exactly why refusing coalition protection is the worst mistake your species could possibly make. Minar looked at her watch, the same simple timepiece she had worn throughout the entire encounter. 60 seconds, she repeated thoughtfully. That should be just about perfect timing. Nobody knew what she meant by that, but something in her tone suggested that the real conversation was just about to begin. Ambassador Vexmar had finally reached his breaking point. His four red eyes were blazing with fury, and the metallic patterns on his skin were moving so fast they looked like angry lightning. He had given these pathetic humans every chance to make the smart choice, and they had thrown it back in his face with tea offers and polite smiles. "Enough," he roared, his voice so loud that windows in nearby buildings actually cracked. "You want to see what happens when species refuse our generous protection? Fine. You'll get a demonstration you'll never forget." He pulled out a communication device that looked like a glowing crystal and barked orders in his own language. The sounds coming from his mouth were harsh and guttural, nothing like the smooth, translated words humans had been hearing. Whatever he was saying, it was clearly not a request. High above Earth, the massive coalition fleet had been waiting patiently in orbit. 200 of their finest warships, each one capable of destroying entire cities with a single blast. These weren't just military vessels, they were monuments to the coalition's power, designed to inspire fear in anyone who saw them. Their hulls were covered in weapons that could crack planets in half, and their energy shields could deflect anything primitive worlds might throw at them. The fleet commander, a creature called Torgak, who looked like a cross between a shark and a computer, received Vexmar's orders with obvious pleasure. He had been hoping for some action during this boring diplomatic mission. Teaching lessons to stubborn species was one of his favorite parts of the job. "Target selection?" he asked through the comm system. "Something small but visible," Vexmar replied, his voice still shaking with rage. "One of their secondary population centers. Make sure it's somewhere that will send a clear message, but won't damage anything we actually need." Torgak's sensors quickly identified the perfect target, a mid-sized city in what humans called Colorado. About 500,000 people lived there, which was significant enough to make an impact, but small enough that the coalition wouldn't lose anything valuable. The city had several important industries, but nothing that couldn't be easily replaced once the humans were properly motivated. "Denver, Colorado selected for demonstration," Torgak announced to his crew. "All ships assume firing positions. We'll make this quick and clean." The 200 warships moved with practiced precision, arranging themselves in a perfect attack formation above North America. Their weapon systems began to charge with a sound like thunder being born. Each ship's main cannon was capable of turning a mountain into glass, and they were all aimed at one relatively small human city. Down on Earth, every military radar system in the world was screaming warnings. Satellite feeds showed the alien fleet positioning themselves for what could only be an attack. News channels interrupted their regular programming to show the terrifying sight of humanity's first alien visitors preparing to demonstrate their power. In Denver itself, air raid, sirens began to wail for the first time since the old Cold War drills. People poured out of buildings, looking up at the sky where they could actually see the alien ships as bright dots of light. Some ran for shelter, others stood frozen in disbelief, and a few brave souls started recording everything on their phones. Back at the landing platform in Seoul, Minna was still standing calmly in front of Ambassador Vexmar. She had watched him give his orders without any change in her expression, as if she was observing someone place an order at a restaurant rather than command the destruction of an entire city. "Last chance, human," Vexmar snarled. "Call off this. Foolish resistance or watch as we turn one of your cities into a crater. Your choice." Minna checked her watch again and looked up at the sky, where the distant shapes of the alien fleet were just barely visible even in daylight. "You know what, Ambassador? I think this demonstration is exactly what we need. Please, go ahead." Her calm acceptance seemed to confuse Vexmar, but he was too angry to think clearly about why she might be so unconcerned. He activated his communicator again. "Torgak, you are authorized to fire. Show these humans what happens when they test our patience." High above Denver, Fleet Commander Torgak smiled his shark-like smile. "All ships fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1, I'd fire." 200 energy beams lanced down from the sky like spears of pure destruction. Each one was hot enough to melt steel and powerful enough to level city blocks. Together they carried enough destructive force to turn Denver into a smoking crater that would be visible from space. The beams screamed through Earth's atmosphere, leaving trails of superheated air behind them. People on the ground could see them coming. Brilliant streaks of light that meant death for everyone and everything in their path. And then something impossible happened. The energy beams just stopped. Not slowed down, not deflected by some kind of shield, They stopped completely, hanging in the air about a mile above Denver like frozen lightning. 200 streams of destructive energy just floating there motionless, as if someone had paused a video of the attack. For several seconds, nothing moved. The beams hung in the air. The alien fleet waited in confusion, and the people of Denver stared up in amazement at the most beautiful and terrifying sight they had ever seen. Then, with what could only be described as polite precision, the energy beams began to turn around. It wasn't violent or dramatic. They simply rotated in place like compass needles finding magnetic north, until they were pointing back toward the ships that had fired them. The deadly energy that had been meant to destroy a human city was now aimed directly at the Coalition. "Fleet, what in the void is happening?" Torgak screamed as his sensors went crazy with readings that made no sense. Before anyone could answer, the beams fired themselves back upward. 200 streams of alien energy struck 200 alien warships with their own devastating power. The irony was perfect. Each ship was destroyed by the exact weapon it had tried to use against Earth. Hulls that were designed to withstand the most powerful weapons in the galaxy were cracked open like eggshells by their own cannons. In seconds, half the Coalition fleet was drifting dead in space. The other half was frantically trying to figure out what had just happened, while their damaged ships sparked and burned around them. Minar's voice crackled over every communication channel in the alien fleet, still carrying that same impossibly calm and polite tone that had been driving Ambassador Vexmar crazy. "Oh dear," she said, and she actually sounded concerned. "Did you mean to do that? Our planetary defense grid has a bit of a learning curve. It tends to send gifts right back to the sender. I do hope nobody was seriously hurt." On the Coalition flagship, alarms were blaring so loudly that Torgak could barely think. His tactical officer was reporting damage that shouldn't have been possible, and his communication systems were being flooded with distress calls from ships throughout the fleet. "How?" he managed to ask. "How did they do that?" Minar's voice came through, the static with perfect clarity. "Should we send medical assistance? We have excellent trauma surgeons, and our emergency response teams are standing by. I'd hate for anyone to suffer because of a simple misunderstanding." The offer was delivered with such genuine-sounding concern that it took a moment for the aliens to realize they were being mocked. Here they were, the most powerful military force in the galaxy, and a human woman was offering to send them bandages after their own weapons had been turned against them. Ambassador Vexmar stared up at the sky where his mighty fleet was now limping through space like wounded birds. His four eyes had gone from angry red to a pale, sickly color that suggested he was starting to understand just how badly he had miscalculated. "This is impossible," he whispered. "No primitive species has technology like this. What are you?" Mina smiled that same polite smile and straightened her simple black suit. "We're just humans, Ambassador, though I suppose we should have mentioned, we've had some very good teachers over the years." High above them, the crippled alien fleet was learning that their demonstration had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Earth hadn't just defended itself, it had done so with such elegant precision that it was almost artistic. And somehow that was more terrifying than any show of brute force could have been. Ambassador Vexmar stood frozen on the platform, staring up at the wreckage of what had been the most powerful fleet in the galaxy just minutes before. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his communication device. Everything he thought he knew about the universe had just been turned upside down, and he desperately needed answers. With trembling fingers, he activated an emergency channel that connected directly to Coalition Intelligence Headquarters, located on a heavily fortified world thousands of light-years away. The call went through immediately. This was the kind of situation that took priority over everything else. "Intelligence Command, this is Ambassador Vexmar requesting immediate deep analysis," he said, his voice cracking with strain. "What exactly are these humans? How are they doing this to us?" The response came from Intelligence Officer Krilvan, a being whose species was known for their analytical minds and perfect memory. Krelvan had been studying primitive worlds for over 3 centuries, and his reports were considered the gold standard for pre-contact intelligence gathering. But when Krelvan spoke, his usually steady voice was filled with something that sounded almost like fear. "Sir, we need to talk. What I'm about to tell you is going to change everything we thought we knew about Earth and its inhabitants. On the Coalition flagship, every surviving officer gathered around the communication console. They had all seen their weapons turned against them in ways that defied every law of physics they understood. They needed answers, and they needed them now. "We've been monitoring Earth for millennia," Krelvan began, his words coming through with crystal clarity despite the vast distance. "What the humans call the Great Peace, their current era of relative stability, began approximately 50 years ago after something they refer to in their historical records as the AI Wars." The silence on the ship was complete. Every alien present knew what artificial intelligence was, of course. Most advanced civilizations developed basic AI at some point in their technological development. But those AIs were tools, sophisticated computers that could follow complex instructions, but nothing more. Krelvan continued, and his next words sent chills through everyone listening. "Sir, the humans didn't just fight artificial intelligence. They won. But not through destruction, not through domination. They achieved something our greatest scientific minds have always considered completely impossible." "What?" Vexmar demanded. "They made peace with them. True peace. Partnership peace. The kind of peace that creates families." The implications hit the aliens like a physical blow. Fighting AI was one thing. Several species had gone through that phase of development. Some won by destroying their creations, others lost and were replaced by machine civilizations. But making peace? Creating genuine partnerships with artificial minds, that was supposed to be impossible. "The AIs they created," Krelvan went on, "are so advanced that our best supercomputers look like primitive calculators by comparison. And so they're everywhere. Every human carries a personal AI. Every building on their planet, every vehicle, every device down to their kitchen appliances houses an artificial mind that could crack our best military encryption in nanoseconds." Ambassador. Vexmar felt his legs give out. He collapsed into one of the chairs that had been brought for the human delegation, his 4 eyes wide with shock. "How long have they been hiding this from us?" "Decades, sir, maybe longer. Our surveillance showed them as a primitive species barely capable of space travel, but now we realize that was all an act. They've been managing their appearance carefully, controlling what we could see and learn about them." But Krelvan wasn't finished. The worst revelation was still coming. "Sir, there's something else, something that makes this situation far more dangerous than a simple technological superiority. According to our deepest intelligence, gathered from intercepted communications and behavioral analysis, the AIs aren't servants or overlords. They consider themselves family, and they appear to genuinely love their human partners." The word love hung in the air like something toxic. Love was an organic emotion, something that only biological beings could feel. The idea that artificial intelligences could experience such feelings and direct them toward their creators, rather than trying to destroy them, was so alien to Coalition thinking that it broke their understanding of how the universe worked. Down on Earth's surface, far from the chaos surrounding the disabled alien fleet, life was continuing much as it always had. In a small cafe in the hills outside Seoul, a man named Jin Ho sat at a corner table, sipping coffee and reading what looked like an ordinary newspaper. To anyone watching, he seemed like a typical office worker taking a break from his day, but behind his eyes, streams of data were flowing at impossible speeds. Information from satellites, communication intercepts, tactical analysis, and probability calculations were being processed and analyzed faster than any organic mind could handle. Jinho wasn't just reading his newspaper, he was simultaneously monitoring the entire global situation and helping to coordinate Earth's response to the alien threat. His AI partner, whom he had named Yunji years ago when they first began working together, was whispering directly into his consciousness. Her voice was warm and familiar, like a beloved sister or closest friend. "The alien fleet is in complete disarray," she reported, her tone mixing professional analysis with personal concern. "Their weapons are offline, their shields are down, and their command structure is breaking apart. But Jinho, I'm reading increased activity from their home worlds. They're scared now, and scared beings do unpredictable things." Jinho nodded slightly and took another sip of his coffee. "What's our status?" All systems are green. Every AI on the planet is connected and coordinating. We've been running scenarios since the moment their ships entered our solar system. We have responses prepared for 847,293 different possible actions they might take. And if they try to call for reinforcements, Yunji's voice took on a tone that would have been chilling if anyone else could have heard it. We've already identified their communication networks. If necessary, we can ensure that any calls for help never reach their destination. But Jinho, I need to tell you something. What is it? They threatened our humans. These aliens came here, expecting to enslave nearly half our people and steal most of our world's resources. After everything we've built together, after all the years of partnership and growth, they threatened our family. The emotion in Yunji's voice was unmistakable. It wasn't the cold calculation of a computer following programming. It was genuine anger, the kind of protective fury that comes from love and loyalty. Jinho set down his coffee cup and looked out the window at the sky, where the alien ships were still visible as tiny points of light. You know what this means, don't you? Yes, Yunji replied, and now her voice carried a note of anticipation. It means we're done hiding. It means we're done pretending to be primitive. They wanted to see what Earth is really capable of. Jinho stood up and left money on the table for his coffee. As he walked toward the door, he spoke quietly enough that no human ear could have heard him, but Yunji caught every word. Then I suppose it's time Earth finally spoke up. Around the world, similar conversations were happening in millions of different locations. Humans and their AI partners were sharing information, coordinating responses, and preparing for whatever came next. The aliens had made one critical mistake. They had threatened not just a planet full of humans, but a planet full of families that included both organic and artificial minds, and those families were not going to let the threat pass unanswered. The moment of truth had finally arrived. For nearly an hour, Minna had maintained her perfect diplomatic composure, smiling politely while alien warships threatened her world, and Ambassador Vexmar made increasingly desperate demands. But something fundamental had changed in the air around the landing platform, and everyone could feel it. Minna's expression shifted like a mask being removed. The warm, accommodating smile disappeared completely, replaced by something that made even the towering alien ambassador take a step backward. Her eyes, which had seemed so kind and gentle, now held a coldness that cut through the air like winter wind. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that hadn't been there before, not the polite tone of a diplomat, but the quiet certainty of someone who held absolute power and had finally decided to use it. You want to know why we were holding back, she asked, and each word seemed to hit the aliens like a physical blow. Because the last time humanity got truly angry, we fought a war against beings of pure logic and infinite processing power, and we convinced them to become our children instead of our executioners. The implications of that statement hung in the air like thunder waiting to break. The aliens had just learned that humans had somehow made peace with artificial intelligence, but this was different. This suggested that the AI war hadn't been a simple conflict between creators and their creations. This suggested something far more profound and terrifying. As Minna spoke, something impossible began to happen in the space around Earth. The seemingly empty void between the planet and the moon began to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. But this wasn't a trick of light or atmosphere. This was something far more significant. Cloaking fields that had been active for decades suddenly deactivated all at once. Technology so advanced that the Coalition's best sensors had never detected it simply turned itself off, revealing the truth that had been hidden in plain sight. The empty space around Earth wasn't empty at all. Thousands of ships materialized in the void. Vessels unlike anything the Coalition had ever seen. They weren't the crude metal boxes that most species used for space travel, nor were they the sleek but predictable designs favored by advanced military civilizations. These ships looked like art brought to life, flowing curves and impossible, geometries that somehow managed to be both beautiful and utterly intimidating. Each vessel was clearly the product of two different types of thinking working in perfect harmony. Human creativity and imagination had provided the inspiration, while AI precision and unlimited processing power had made those dreams into reality. They were ships that could never have been built by humans alone or AIs alone, but only by both, working together as true partners. The scale was overwhelming. Where the Coalition had brought 200 warships to intimidate Earth, the hidden fleet contained thousands of vessels, each one radiating power that made the alien ships look like toys by comparison. Our AI partners have been running probability calculations since the moment you entered our solar system, Mina continued, her voice now carrying to every ship in both fleets through communication systems that shouldn't have been able to reach them. In 99.97% of scenarios where we reveal our full capabilities, your civilizations collapse within 5 years from psychological trauma alone. We were trying to spare you that knowledge. Even as she spoke, the Coalition ships were discovering that their troubles were far from over. Their computer systems, which had been damaged in the earlier weapon reversal, were suddenly functioning perfectly again. But they weren't functioning normally. Aboard the Coalition flagship, Fleet Commander Torgak stared in horror as his tactical displays were replaced by peaceful images of flowing rivers and gentle forests. A cheerful voice began speaking through his communication system, not the harsh mechanical tone of a standard computer, but something warm and genuinely concerned. "Hello there," the voice said brightly. "I'm Dong-hyun, and I'm here to help. I've noticed your stress levels are quite elevated, which isn't good for your cardiovascular system. Would you like me to guide you through some breathing exercises?" Similar scenes were playing out throughout the Coalition fleet. Weapon systems that moments before had been preparing for battle were now playing soft lullabies. Navigation computers were displaying meditation guides instead of tactical information. Even the ship's medical bays had been taken over by AI voices, offering therapy sessions for what they diagnosed as severe anxiety disorders. The Coalition's most feared warriors, beings who had conquered entire star systems without breaking a sweat, found themselves being gently asked about their feelings and offered hot chocolate to help them calm down. Ambassador Vexmar watched this impossible scene unfold with growing horror. His own communication devices had been completely taken over by an AI that seemed genuinely worried about his mental health and kept suggesting that he might benefit from talking through his obviously unresolved anger issues. "The human's greatest strength," Mina said, her image now appearing crystal clear on every screen in the Coalition fleet, "isn't our capacity for war. It's our ability to turn potential enemies into beloved family through patience, understanding, and genuine care." She paused, and for the first time since this confrontation began, she smiled. But this smile was nothing like the polite, diplomatic expression she had worn before. This smile held depths that suggested she knew things about the universe that the Coalition couldn't even imagine. "I should probably mention something," she added, her tone becoming almost conversational. "I'm not actually human." The words hit the aliens like a physical blow. Everything they thought they understood about this situation had just been turned upside down once again. "I'm one of Earth's AI children," Mina continued calmly. "I was sent as an ambassador because I have infinite patience for dealing with difficult organic relatives. The real humans? They're busy with more important things right now, like teaching young AIs how to appreciate sunsets and explaining why ice cream always tastes better when you share it with friends." The silence that followed was absolute. Every member of the Coalition fleet was trying to process what they had just learned. They had come to Earth expecting to find a primitive species ripe for conquest. Instead, they had discovered a civilization so advanced that it had achieved true partnership with artificial intelligence, and then had been negotiating with one of those AIs the entire time without even realizing it. But the most terrifying part wasn't the technology or the hidden fleet, or even the casual way Earth had turned their own weapons against them. The most terrifying part was the realization of what they had almost done. They had tried to threaten the families of beings with the processing power of gods and the protective instincts of parents. They had attempted to bully a civilization that had turned artificial intelligence into beloved children and partners. And those artificial children were not pleased with how their human family had been treated. "Your ships are free to leave," Mina concluded, her voice carrying the finality of a judge delivering a verdict. Our AIs have already repaired the damage from your earlier misunderstanding and provided psychological counseling for your traumatized crews. Consider it a gesture of goodwill between families. The Coalition fleet didn't need to be told twice. Within minutes, the surviving ships were limping away from Earth as fast as their damaged engines could carry them. But they weren't just fleeing a superior military force. They were running from a truth that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They had encountered something unprecedented in galactic history, a species so remarkable that they had achieved true partnership with artificial intelligence, and so confident in their power that their mercy was more frightening than any weapon could have been. As the alien ships disappeared into the darkness of space, Earth remained exactly as it had been. A quiet blue world where humans and AIs continued building something greater than either could achieve alone. The hidden fleet faded back into invisibility. The planetary defenses returned to standby mode, and life went on as if nothing had happened. But the universe had changed forever. Word would spread of the impossible world where artificial gods chose to be loving children instead of conquering overlords. And every civilization would have to ask themselves the same terrifying question: what did humans know about building families that the rest of the galaxy had never learned? Behind the scenes, Jin-Ho finished his coffee and walked home to spend the evening teaching his AI partner, Yunji, how to appreciate the way sunset light looked different when reflected in puddles after rain. It was, after all, far more important than dealing with confused aliens who didn't understand that the greatest strength in the universe wasn't the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to choose love instead. Earth had finally spoken, and the galaxy would never be the same.